Just going to go home and make one. Go ahead. You know, it'd make more sense than actually buying it. But you know, that's just the way it works. It's very. It also just depends on where it is. I mean, New York is one place you can get prices. I was represented by a gallery in Los Angeles for a number of years, and this was that ended up being pretty lucrative. I was able to make a living for 4 years in the 80s making and selling art, where I didn't have to do anything else. And then the bottom of the market dropped out, I guess late 80s, early 90s. And my wife and I had a second child, and she suggested that I might want to get a job. and that's when I went in. I had been adjuncted, you know, but it didn't pay. You know, you had to travel all over the place. It didn't pay. I, did adjuncting. I couldn't really afford to do that. So that's when I went to the public school system. I went into Los Angeles, and they would pay you. I started off as a substitute. They would pay you combat pay. If you were willing to go into South Central or Watts, they'd give you $125 a day. This was in the late 1980s. If subbing in any around here now, they'll pay you, I think it's like, 70 tops. This was close to 30 years ago, and it was, it was decent money, And so anyway, Sydney, my daughter, was born, and my wife said, I really think you should probably get a job. So I ended up in a classroom in Los Angeles, and the teacher, it was special ed, that's how I got into special ed, and the teacher didn't come back. It was April, and it was supposed to just be a week gig, and the teacher never came back. The teacher had been hit in the head with a chair, as it turns out, which they didn't tell me when I went in. So I stayed.
By one of the students?
Yeah, by one of the students. By Laron. Laron hit him in the head with a chair. The way Laron tells it is he deserved it. Yeah. So I went in, and I was there for from April to the end, and then the principal asked if I'd stay another year, so I stayed another year, and I kept making art. And then my gallery closed in Los Angeles, and we moved. I grew up in Montgomery County, so we moved back here because we moved to Frederick County, and then I ended up going back to GW and getting a master's in education so I could continue to teach and get paid for it, as opposed to the substitute wage that I've been receiving. I don't know why, I can't remember why I exactly lapsed into that story. But it's just, it's a very circuitous path. And the only thing that's remained constant for me is that I continued to make art, and I continued to make art. And there were years where I didn't get any opportunities to show. There were years where I would just make stuff and pile it up. I've got a storage facility. I've got, underneath my studio, above my studio. The high school that I work at lets me store stuff there. But I kept working. And then I got an opportunity about 10 years ago. A gallery from New York saw my work and asked me if I'd be interested, and I said yes, I would. And so I've been with them now for 10 years, and things are going well, in that they haven't dropped me. I think that's, really, because they purged. A little while ago they purged, and we were all waiting to see who it was that they were going to get rid of. And all of us were certain that it was going to be us, I knew it. I knew that they were going to get rid of me. They haven't yet, but I still expect it. You do. You just expect it, unless you're, you're really selling, and, then you're lucky to get an opportunity, I think. And that's why these kind of galleries are great, because you get chances to put your work up, to talk to people who are interested, to get it out of the studio, to step back and look at it, to examine it critically. When you're working on it in your studio, it's hard to see. It's hard to know whether it's working or not. When you're in your class and you're so, intensely working on one of your pieces, you think you got it, but you just aren't sure. And oftentimes it just takes getting it up and getting some distance from it, and then coming back and looking at it that you know whether or not you've hit or not. And then having people that you trust look at it, and you know, and they can tell you whether or not it's working. This last piece here, this one, because I like this one so much, I figured what I'd do is I'd actually do one that I controlled. And so I took a piece of aluminum and I painted it white, and then I took 64 quart-sized cans and I lined them up on the aluminum, and I had the board at an angle. And well, and I also, after I painted it white, I splashed some red on it because I had some red from another paint can in my hand, and I like went like that. It was on my glove. And some yellow, same thing. And then I started pouring acid at the top here, as if it was angled like this. And I would just go along and I would pour acid here and let it run through, probably, you know, contaminating the groundwater. But and I did this for about 2 weeks. I didn't do it every day, but I'd come by, I'd pour acid on it, I'd let it go, and then every now and again I'd pick up one of the cans and I'd look underneath to see what was happening. And then when it got to the right place, the right level of corrosion, I stopped the process. Rinsed it off, took the board out, looked at it, thought it was beautiful, sprayed it with polyurethane and framed it, because now it's valuable. You know, it's rusted metal, basically, rusted aluminum, and the acid ate through parts of it where it cooled, you know, which makes it even more beautiful. So I'm quite fond of this piece, these two, and then the big one that you guys see when you walk in. That was the last piece that I did before my show in New York. My work in the past has always been, I use a lot of metal, I use a lot of lead, I use a lot of copper. I've always done pieces that were really serious stuff, social commentary about the population that I work with. I did a whole series of pieces about homelessness at one point. You know, there's just, you know, the social inequities that we find around us. So I'd always done stuff like that. And so this was actually kind of a relief to work this way, you know, with color. I never use color. I mean, it's always, you know, lead. If there was color, it was because it was inherent in the material. I didn't add color to anything. And the piece that's around here, the big hanging one that was in the paper, it was the last piece I did. I was done pretty much with everything, ready to go to New York. I started just taking all the rest of the lids that I had and sewing them together, using all the different colors of paint can lids that I had. And there were a couple of them that had holes in it, like this. You know those paint cans that have the little plastic spouts, and you punch the spout through, and there was the hole. And it was on there on that one with the color, and I looked at the hole and I thought, oh, I really like that hole. And then I thought, I'm gonna make some more holes. And so I got my bit out and I started drilling holes through the cans, and that left. Well, you guys need to walk around here because that started this whole thing rolling. These so I started, like, this was, I think, the one that had the hole in it. And I thought, oh, I'm going to make more holes. So I started, like, cutting out holes. Well, I cut out this hole, and that led to this little blue disc. And I thought, wow, I really like that little blue disc. I'm going to attach that to a piece. And then that's what happened. And so I had about 3 weeks before the show in New York. And every morning before I'd go to work, or every evening, I was waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning because when you're preparing for something like this, and I have a full-time job, so you know my time was limited and my brain was full, and I would wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I couldn't go back to sleep, so I'd go down to the studio, and I would do a lot of this between the hours of like 2 and 5 in the morning, and then I started. And then, things like I found this star, I was walking around with my daughter, and I always pick up stuff off the ground, and I like that, so I made more stars. And then I pop riveted the things on, and it just became, it was fun. This was fun to do, and I hadn't really enjoyed, I don't always find it to be a relaxing or enjoyable thing, making art. I found it to be a lot of work, and oftentimes a certain amount of tension, and you're concerned about it. Is it working? Is it not working? What am I going to do with it? Where am I going to store it when nobody buys it? But what I ended up with was I had this hanging in my studio, and I would walk in there, I'd work on it, and then I'd go shower and get ready for work, and I'd come back down, and it gave me joy. It gave me joy to see it, and I feel that way even now. That's why when I had this opportunity and I saw this wall, I thought that's where this one will go. I want this to be the first thing that I see when I walk into the gallery. And I think, and now of course I look at it and I think, well, I got to change this, and I'll, get it back home, and I'll do something different here. And who's it? Andy pointed out to me. That's Andy. That I'm missing a wire, which I'm now obsessing about. So I'll come back tomorrow and fix that. But that's it. I could continue talking for hours. But does anybody have any questions along the way? About anything, sports. That's still probably my most favorite thing.
Did you play football?
Yes. My wife was. She was very upset by the hundreds of plastic bags, she called them body bags, that had been filled with cat litter and paint that I had in piles around the yard outside of my studio. They were very heavy, and I couldn't afford to dispose of them all at once, and plus the weight was so great that I didn't have a vehicle that could haul them, and they were literally outside. I started this project about 1.5 years ago, so there have been these trash bags in the yard. They're gone now, but that was the main thing that she's concerned about is one, how much money are you spending? Do you really think anybody's going to buy this? What are you going to do with the body bags? Other than that, though, she likes them. I've been really lucky. I mean, we've been married for a long time, and she's always been very supportive of everything I've done. There's certain things that I've done that she likes more. She likes, like when I'm doing things in copper that I'm really finishing and they're more refined, or things like that. She likes things that are, what she calls my prettier work. And she doesn't get a lot of what it is that I do sometimes, but I don't get a lot of what it is that she does sometimes, so it all works out. Yeah. And this is, the next stop for some of these pieces is, are you guys familiar with the restaurant Volt in Frederick? There's a restaurant. Did anybody watch Top Chef? It's a TV show. I didn't watch it either, but I've heard about it. Well, it's a TV show on some network. And there were two brothers who were competing for top honors, and their last name was Botaglio, and one owns a restaurant called Volt in Frederick, and the other is the lead chef of a restaurant in Pasadena, and they happened to be in the same competition and ended up, I'm sure they staged it, but they ended up competing against each other for the top prize. So the restaurant in Frederick, called Volt after Brian, is putting on an outdoor sculpture exhibit, and so I was invited to do my tapestry pieces. They have a giant brick wall. So I would encourage you guys all to come. Margaret will know about the